We look at things in our lives and we see that happens, and we look at the immediate first time. Okay, yeah, I know what happened. I broke my leg. I broke my foot. But we don't look at the other outlying factors of it. What causes all these things? We look at David's life and we can see that there's a pattern here that God is trying to show to David. First of all, is a crisis reviewed. Saul's jealousy. Saul's attempt to kill David. He has his enemies try to kill him. He has his wife's betrayal. He puts out a contract on David's life. Now, if you're David and you're going, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be king, and all of a sudden you're left running for your life because Saul was trying to kill you. Let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 18. And beginning in verse 1, it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan came one in spirit with David. He loved him as himself. And from that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan took off his robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow and his belt. Here was Jonathan, Saul's son, who was heir to the throne, saying to David, wait a minute, I know God wants you to be king. Here is what is mine is yours. He loved David that much. And David's like, wow, this is great. And then in verse 5, whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the people and Saul's officers as well. And when the men returned home after David had killed the Philistines, the women came out from the towers of Israel to meet the king Saul with singing and dancing and joyful songs with tambourines and lutes. And as they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his 1,000. Imagine that. They're coming out saying, Saul has killed his 1,000. He's a great king and all this. And it looks great. And Saul's like, yeah, that's right. But then they say, but David has killed 10,000. What? You're giving him more credit than me? It wasn't that David was doing this intentionally. God had gifted him. God had called him to be that warrior that he was. And he's coming out and he's doing naturally what God had said. And like you and I, we go through each day doing what God has gifted us and gave us the talents to do. But someone is never going to be happy. There's always someone that's not going to be pleased. Someone that's going to be jealous. Someone that's going to look at you. And Saul was that one. It was even his boss. How many of you in here have had a boss come in your office and say something or cause something in your work, and you're like, I didn't deserve that. That isn't the way it should be. We feel mistreated. We're relying on our talents, our crutches, to get us through that. In verse 8, it says, Saul was very angry. This refrain goaded him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit came from God forcefully upon Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the harp, and as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded it twice. Wow. He went through this. Here he was in Saul's court. Saul invited him there. He would sing and play music to help Saul calm and soothe his soul. But now he's turned again. He's trying to kill him. And David realizes this and he takes off running. He takes off running for his life. And we're going to see over the next few years of what takes place in God slowly removing those crutches from David's life, his life. The first crutch he removes is his position. David was a military officer. He was second in command, virtually, with the army. He was a great warrior, and people were following after him. And he went out into the world and conquering the enemy and having great victories. So he was kind of getting confident in himself. Stories told about a young man who was a janitor in a big church. And one day the church administrator, a young one, so that rules me out, don't say it's me, came along and he talked to the janitor. And he said to the janitor, I just found out that you can't read and write. And the janitor said, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, we're going to have to fire you. We're going to have to terminate you. So the janitor gathers all his stuff up and he goes out, goes home, thinks about it a while. We had a little meager savings, nothing spectacular, but he bought this little shop. And he put all he had into that little shop. And soon people were coming and they were buying his wares. And he was getting a reputation in his hometown of how great it was and how good it was. And pretty soon that business grew. So he opened up the next shop. And it grew. And he opened up a third shop. And the same thing happened. Everywhere he went, that shop, his wares were selling and people were buying it. And they liked the company. And he became fairly wealthy. He had $100,000 or so in the bank, and he was doing well in his business. One day his banker came to him, and he said to him, just think, where would you be if you knew how to read and write? And the janitor looked at him, he says, I'd be a janitor in that church. You see, sometimes we lose things that we hold on to that give us that sense of security, that sense of hope, that sense of belonging, our self-worth. But in reality, it's a crutch. We're never forced to go beyond that because relying on that position to get us to be what we want to be.